Just before midnight on Mother's Day in 1986, a group of 15 teenage boys and girls, along with a mother, a priest, an administrator, and 2 guides, gathered at an Episcopal high school in Portland, Oregon. Their mission was ambitious: to reach the summit of Mount Hood within the next 12 hours, marking the culmination of an adventure program required for all sophomores. But as they ascended, nature turned against them. The weather shifted dramatically, plunging the group into a merciless whiteout. With blizzard winds howling and temperatures plummeting well below freezing, this inexperienced team found themselves in a desperate fight for survival, relying on limited resources and knowledge. 4 days later, after a harrowing ordeal on the mountain, only 9 would return alive. But what happened in those fateful days? Let us now uncover the chilling and heartbreaking details of this tragic expedition, which was later dubbed as the second worst Alpine disaster to ever happen in North America. Before we dive in, I'd like to request you to please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us motivated to bring you more fascinating stories. Thank you. Mount Hood is a breathtaking sight, its snow-capped peak rising 11,239 feet above sea level. A dormant volcano, it's home to 12 permanent glaciers that carve deep crevices into the mountain, each a potential trap for an unwary climber. Its sloping edges can trigger deadly avalanches, and its weather can shift from serene to savage in minutes. To the inexperienced, its beauty masks its many dangers, luring adventurers who underestimate the risks. This majestic peak, which had already claimed 130 lives, was about to teach these students lessons far beyond what anyone had anticipated. This daring expedition was part of a program called Base Camp, an initiative by Oregon Episcopal School designed to foster teamwork, problem-solving, and personal growth by placing the students in a tough atmosphere that demands collaboration and selflessness. But nobody knew at the time that it would soon spiral into a real-life catastrophe. The group's journey to Mount Hood began a short hour-and-a-half drive from their school campus. Leading the way was Thomas Goman, a 42-year-old chaplain, Episcopal priest, and seasoned mountaineer. While Goman had enough experience to guide students in calm or moderate conditions, nothing could have prepared him for the treacherous weather ahead. Alongside him were 2 other adults, Marion Horwell, the school's dean of residence and student affairs, and Sharon Spray, a devoted parent who had joined to accompany her daughter Hillary. While Marion was a capable educator, she had never climbed a mountain before, adding to the group's overall inexperience. 2 additional guides would join them at Timberline Lodge: Dee Zduniak, an outward-bound instructor, and Ralph Summers, a professional mountain guide. Adding an unsettling twist to the story, Timberline Lodge happens to be the location where parts of the horror movie The Shining were filmed. For the excited teens and their guides, the climb began early on Monday, May 12th. At around 3 a.m., they set out from Timberline Lodge, starting their ascent at an elevation of 6,000 feet. The temperature was biting cold, but the weather seemed calm and steady for now. Although forecasts warned of terrible conditions later that day, Thomas Goman, the group's priest and leader, believed they could safely reach the summit before the storm arrived. Unfortunately, this decision marked the beginning of a chain of fatal errors. As dawn approached, doubts began to creep in among the climbers. Some wanted to turn back, but Goman urged them to keep going. The first to retreat were Sharon and Hillary Spray, a mother-daughter duo. Hillary, due to stomachache, insisted on turning back, and that decision would later save her life. By 5 a.m., the group, running an hour behind schedule, reached a warming station called Silcock's Hut at 7,000 feet. Around this point, 3 more students decided to descend, choosing safety over risk. The remaining group pressed on and reached the Palmer Lift at 8,500 feet around 8 a.m. The cold wind was biting, yet the weather still seemed manageable. The group continued climbing until 11:30 a.m., when Dee Zduniak, the outward-bound instructor, made the tough call to head back as she was suffering from mild snow blindness. Dee departed on her own, leaving 13 climbers to continue the ascent. This decision came shortly after the group had passed the Hog's Back, a section of the mountain at approximately 10,600 feet. Surprisingly, Goman remained confident they could still summit and return safely. Goman seemed unaware of how quickly Mount Hood's weather could turn and persist for days, unleashing harsh conditions that show no mercy to climbers. His unchecked ambition and disregard for the risks would soon come at a heavy cost. As the storm grew fiercer, heavy snowfall and sleet battered the climbers, reducing visibility to nearly zero. From here, things went from bad to worse. At roughly 11,000 feet, Summers made the decision to scout ahead alone. However, after just 30 or 40 feet, he turned back, realizing how dangerous the conditions had become. This was the moment he finally managed to persuade Goman that they couldn't continue. The group finally turned around and began their descent. But by this time, the situation had already spiraled out of control. They found themselves trapped in the middle of a raging storm, engulfed in a condition known as a whiteout. Visibility had plummeted to a mere 20 or 30 feet, and it was impossible to tell the difference between the earth and sky, and the severe weather was starting to take its toll on the climbers. The first victim was 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis, the youngest member. By 3:30 p.m., Patrick began showing alarming signs of hypothermia. His speech slurred, and he kept collapsing, wanting nothing more than to sleep. Despite their efforts to descend, the group had only managed to reach the Hogsback section of the climb. The group rallied around 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis, who was struggling to stay alive. They placed him in their only sleeping bag and huddled close, trying desperately to share their body heat. Susan McClave, one of the more experienced climbers in the group, removed her jacket and shoes, then climbed into the sleeping bag with McGinnis, hoping to transfer some of her precious warmth to the ailing teenager. But their efforts, sadly, were not enough. After about an hour of these desperate attempts to stabilize themselves and their friends, they knew they had no choice but to continue their descent down the mountain. As they pushed forward in their descent, Goman, struggling with the mental fog and confusion brought on by the cold, unintentionally led the group off course, traversing sideways along the slope instead of descending straight down. The conditions were now even more brutal. The wind roared at 70 miles per hour, and visibility dropped to a mere 10 feet. Amid the chaos, Ralph Summers and Susan McClave, the most experienced members of the group, stepped up to take charge. They were now near the edge of the glacier, standing at an elevation of 8,200 feet. It was here that their leader, Summers, made a critical decision. There was no choice but to stop, dig in, and wait for either the storm to pass or for help to arrive. By this time, it was around 7 p.m. Summers, along with Goman, set to work, carving out a snow cave in a desperate attempt to shield everyone from the brutal elements overnight. In the early hours of the next day, the rescue teams were informed of trouble on Mount Hood after the group hadn't returned on time. Mark Kelsey, a seasoned member of the Portland Mountain Rescue Team who had summited the peak over 460 times, stated that they were the worst weather conditions he had ever seen. By 5:21 a.m., Mark and other PMR team members arrived at Timberline Lodge with bags of gear, fully prepared for the grueling rescue operation ahead. However, they had no clear idea of where the stranded students were. Despite the impossible odds, the rescue team pressed on, determined to do everything they could to save lives. After all, it was the lives of the students at stake. A relentless whiteout grounded helicopters. While high on the mountainside, the group's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Amid the chaos, Summers and Goman managed to carve out a snow cave in about an hour, a remarkable feat given the physical and mental toll of the day. But the cave, measuring just 6 by 8 feet and barely 4 feet high, could only fit 6 people comfortably, yet the group had 13 souls to shelter. This meant that the group had to take turns sitting into it. But inside the cave, hope was dwindling. Exhaustion, cold, and despair were taking their toll. Sensing the dire need for action, Summers made a critical decision. He tested Goman's coherence by asking him to count to 10, a task Goman couldn't complete. Summers knew they couldn't wait any longer. He made the bold choice to leave the group and search for help. A brave student named Molly Shula volunteered to join him. Together, they stepped into the relentless whiteout, leaving behind 11 freezing, frightened individuals huddled in the tiny cave. Against all odds, they eventually made it to Mount Hood Meadows Lodge, a ski resort about 3 miles southeast of the snow cave they had abandoned. Though far off course, they had saved their own lives. But the fate of the 11 people still trapped in the collapsing snow cave, thousands of feet higher, where they were left to endure another 2 harrowing days in the suffocating confines of the snow cave. Details of what happened during those final days remain incomplete, and perhaps that's a mercy. The final moments of those who didn't make it are likely too painful to imagine. It's believed that on Tuesday night, Alison Litzenberger, gathering every ounce of strength and courage she had left, ventured outside the cave. Aaron O'Leary and Eric Sandvik followed her into the storm. That same night, rescuers had to suspend their search at 9 p.m. due to worsening weather conditions. 3 students were left outside in the freezing storm, while 8 others remained buried deep inside the cave. Then early Wednesday morning, hope appeared on the horizon. At sunrise around 5:45 a.m., the rescue team made a grim discovery. In a section of the mountain called the White River Canyon, they spotted 2 dark shapes against the snow. It was Alison Litzenberger and Aaron O'Leary. The rescuers found them curled into fetal positions, one lying just above the other. It wasn't the posture of a fall, but one of desperate attempts to preserve warmth in the face of the unrelenting cold. Tragically, their body temperatures had dropped too low for survival. Around the same time, another rescue crew made a heartbreaking discovery. They found the body of Eric Sandvik. Eric had fought desperately to make it back into the cave, likely for hours, but ultimately collapsed in the snow. With no shelter and the storm at its peak, survival was impossible. What's tragic is that Eric was almost directly above where his friends were trapped. Yet the rescue teams had no way of knowing that the snow cave they were searching for might have been right below him. Kelsey called for a helicopter to recover the bodies they had found and continued probing for the snow cave, but they were suddenly pulled off their location as Summers redirected the search effort to a different area. The search efforts were winding down, with no new leads to follow. But one man refused to give up. His instincts might have saved 2 lives that day. Master Sergeant Richard Hayter, part of the 304th Recovery Squadron, had an unshakable hunch this time. He believed the search team was looking in the wrong place. Determined to act on his intuition, Hayter climbed aboard a Huey helicopter and flew up to 8,200 feet. From there, he dropped a smoke flare over the area where he believed the missing climbers might be and radioed the team, urging them to focus their efforts there. Finally, at 5:38 p.m., just 22 minutes before the day's search was scheduled to end, something happened. Charlie Eck, another sergeant in the 304th, hit something solid. A flurry of digging followed, and soon the searchers were hit by a foul, unmistakable smell. They immediately knew that they were on target. Moments later, a faint moaning sound emerged from the cave. Inside, they found Brenton Clark and Giles Thompson. Brenton was lying just beneath Giles at the cave's entrance. They were the only 2 survivors left. Rescue helicopters rushed the pair to the city for urgent, life-saving surgery. They had come perilously close to death. Inches from tragedy, Brenton and Giles were given a second chance, all thanks to Hayter's persistence and the heroic work of the search team. For months after the tragedy, doctors fought tirelessly to save Thompson's life. Though they succeeded, it came at a devastating cost. He lost both of his legs. As for Brenton Clark, she made a full recovery and is now a doctor practicing in Portland, Oregon. Like many survivors of such life-altering events, she channeled her experience into helping others heal. It's often said that time heals all wounds, but grief doesn't truly vanish. It lingers, becoming a part of you. Over time, you learn to carry it, to adapt, and to keep moving forward despite the weight it leaves behind. Those who endure trauma must integrate it into their sense of self, shaping a new understanding of the world. The events of that day on Mount Hood leave us with many questions. From the accounts and investigations that followed, one thing is clear. The severe weather warnings were ignored. Tom Goman, believing so strongly in his group, was confident they could push through the storm. However, there were critical moments when they should have turned back, but the drive to reach the summit outweighed caution. It wasn't just one decision or one person that led to the loss of 9 lives that day. Multiple factors played a role, but Goman's determination and risk-taking undeniably contributed. The names of Patrick McGinnis, Tasha Amy, Marion Horwell, Susan McClave, Richard Hayter, Eric Sandvik, Tom Goman, Aaron O'Leary, and Alison Litzenberger will forever be etched into the history of Mount Hood, a somber reminder of the unforgiving nature of the mountains. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again in our next video.